I greet you, dear friends, guests, subscribers of our channel. Thank you for joining us here live. It is the 17th, 17 p.m. Good time. And I'm glad you're joining and reacting in that chat to the poll that we have there and to the questions that we've posted. And I see you guys are ready to our conversation with Alexey Arestovich. Hello. Hello, everybody. Good evening. All right, friends, you see on your screens, and you probably will see it in recording, both on channels of mine and of Alexey. So there are two QR codes. The one near Alexey is the link to the personal development school Apeiron that he runs. Very interesting courses they have, pretty amazing seminars. So if you're interested, follow that. QR code next to me, this is to the fundraiser. For the last couple of days, we're trying to help a close friend of our family whose father was mobilized, who was 50 plus already, and he was sent to the front, to the zero. And friends are gathering money for their detachment for the bus that they need so much. It's difficult to do a fundraiser for a minivan, for a bus in Ukraine because of associations with drafting commission. That's why I took it on myself to help them get that vehicle. They do need this for transportation on the front. You know what, Sash, let us help you with this fundraiser. We can put the link on our channel as well under the stream. And let's join our forces. Right, we will succeed. It's getting there, but really thank you so much for making an effort. I'm usually skeptical about these fundraisers, but it touched upon the close friend of mine, and I'm trying my best to help them. All right, let's start. Let's start traditionally with the poll. Zelensky said he told Trump that Ukraine will either have nukes or they will be in NATO. What would you choose, personally? And the options you have: NATO, nukes, Trump, another president of Ukraine. And this is the poll. I think it's a rather serious sensation that was published from president's statements in Europe during his visit. I think we can start with this. I think now it's becoming more clear why the West is canceling Rammsteins, why they're not really pushing help quickly. That last package that United States is sending us 400 billions, but mostly it's defense weapons. Who pulled his tongue? Why is he saying these things? Is he correct making these threats? Well, we had a similar statement before, right? We had that before the war on the Forum for Security in Munich. Russian side was very nervous when they heard that, and our partners were very surprised. And Russians actually used that as one of the so-called reasons to attack Ukraine, or they use it as a base for their aggression against Ukraine. So, in my view, posting a question in the ultimatum way that we'll either have nukes or be part of NATO, this is blackmail, but this is not blackmail of Russia. This is blackmail of our partners, and that's how exactly they take it. There was also a statement from Associated Press published in parallel with that Zelensky basically gave an ultimatum to NATO at the beginning of September and gave them 3 months to give it a thought, to come with some conclusions. From my point of view, it's very reminiscent of the times when Colin Powell, who was the head of the Chiefs of Staff, he was waving some curate on the podium, supposedly that it had some Iraqi mass weapons of mass destruction, and that was used as a reason to attack Iraq. There was also another element when Kuwait nurse supposedly was, again, almost in the United Nations, giving a big statement how Saddam's soldiers came to the birth house, they were killing women and children there, and everybody were horrified and said, yes, let's go and save Kuwaitis from Iraq. And then later it turned out that this lady was a daughter of the ambassador of Kuwait in the United States, who never worked as a nurse in any birthing hospital, and everything was fine in her life. There were a lot of cases like this in world history when they were used as a reason to explain why a certain invasion needs to happen. In our case, we're trying to use that as a stimulus for a peace agreement. But people in the West that I am in communication here with, they treat it as the attempt to transfer responsibility onto the West. So it's a culmination of the pseudo-reality, well, all responsibility for the consequences of this war fall on the West, or attempted to be put on the West. And you add this nukes threats, you add the Korean military supposedly showing up on the front. And now they're pointing fingers at the West and Zelensky administration, saying that we should have won, we should have prevailed. As Mikhail Podolyak said, we had mathematical calculations that were telling us we should win, but the West prevailed us from getting an upper hand. And this is part of that construct to blame the West. So I think the West will either be found exclusively guilty for our loss in this war, or will be at least sharing that burden with Zelensky administration and Ukrainian citizens as well. So the statement of Zelensky shows that those people who are writing speeches for him, they're already basing these statements from Ukrainian loss de facto. Oh, okay, so I want some details here. You, as the person who worked in the office, what are the signs? How do you draw these conclusions? A very simple signs, actually. If they start looking for responsible, you don't need to work in the office to understand that they're looking for responsibility to blame upon somebody. If it was a positive result, they would be owning it completely, and the West supposedly wasn't even helping too much, and they're just giving some for matches and cigarettes, just like in the Soviet Union times, when they completely put under the carpet the Lend-Lease program that was supporting them. They were playing as if Lend-Lease didn't matter. But when you start tracking the facts, it figures out that without Lend-Lease, everything would probably be over even before Stalingrad. And it is not only about the actual battle equipment, but even raw materials or copper that was supplied to Russia in huge quantities. So whenever responsibility is negative, that is the one being shared. Positive is usually owned. And I can tell you another scary mystery here, however you guys want to take it. But here from the shores of Potomac, there's coming another suggestion for a ceasefire before the elections in the US that adds more points to Kamala, as if they concluded this conflict, or do it after the new year. Because there is a push here in states that if Ukraine doesn't listen to this suggestion, that will be remembered for a long time, if not forever. And certain decisions will be made. Then they're also bringing to note that there were a lot of promises made during Zelensky's visit that were supposed to be executed or completed between the 1st and 14th of October, and none of those agreements was followed. And Washington contacts were calling Kiev, were asking the question whether EU efforts are even negotiable. Can we talk to you? Is there anything we can trust? There was no answer from Kiev, and after this, Rammstein was moved, on the level of the president, by the way, was postponed. North Koreans started to appear in Russia, and new support from the allies is being postponed to some indefinite future. Now the news are coming that Rammstein might still happen, but it likely will occur after the election in the US, which are only about 2 weeks away. And an interesting point is that the United States still gave some aid to Ukraine, so they saw some reciprocation finally. And this is what's happening on the backdrop of all these statements that we will never surrender, nukes, NATO, etc., Koreans. That tells me that these heightened degrees of heat and escalation are called upon to mask the real negotiation process, which I think willy-nilly but Ukraine is moving toward. What do you mean? What kind of agreement, Alexey? Well, to conclude a ceasefire agreement, and that's what the G5, in this case, are asking for. 5 major players in this conflict: Great Britain, United States, EU, China, and Russia. And De facto, this is a collection of the permanent members of UN Security Council. Well, there is some disconnect here, Alexei. Russia is advancing on the front, right? Indeed, they do. But have you followed through with his recent statement about Russian-Ukrainian conflict overall? On the 4th of July, the only statement he made, there was not another one, he said that Russia is for peace and that Istanbul agreements are on the table and there's nothing better. There is no other statement. If Putin wanted to make another statement, he would have made another one with explanations and details of what he wants, what he is eager to trade. There is no other statement. There are no attacks on our energy infrastructure, so they are carrying through with the promises they've taken upon themselves. Russia is following this corridor. There is one party that is not following in this story. Zelensky is saying that the winter is near, right? Like in the movie, the winter is nigh. Are you implying that there'll be some more attacks on our energy system by Russia? Yeah, that's what I'm implying. Well, this is possible in one scenario when Kiev does not fulfill the part of duties that are impinged upon them, that were agreed with the aid of Potomac and that Russia is adhering to. All other participants of Big Five in this conflict, they're following the agreements that are leading supposedly to the ceasefire, except for us. It's also Israel that is not really following the recommendations of its allies, so I'll call us both infant terribles, Israel and Ukraine, and one could cheer that and say that big players should not be solving the destinies of smaller countries, but problem is that when we come to their banquet, we break the dishes, we get their attention, and irritated, but they turn their heads to us and say, okay, we're listening. We then offer some victory plan that you saw the response or reception of this plan by the Western media. The softest description was that the plan is very vague, unreal, and impossible to implement. Well, but Meloni today cheered Zelensky peace plan, and I want to add here that Charles Michel was, in the meantime, when Zelensky was talking about the scary winter that is coming, he kind of was looking for somebody else, like he was just standing there on a stage or in the bus with him, but not with him. Right, just looking for some other eye contacts in the studio, in the audience. So, it's reminiscent to me when Zelensky said that he came on a press conference that he came to Europe not to agree about peace treaty with Russia, but Macron at the same moment winked twice to the journalists. So European politicians are apparently having fun during it. And do you think it looks or reminds you of some comic book? Scary winter, nuclear winter, NATO or death, North Koreans, etc., etc. This reminds of a comic book for 10-year-olds in some teens magazine about intergalactic invaders. Did you notice that in the West there's very little publication about North Koreans? Given that the Western specialists do know what is and who are coming to Russia, and yet not a single major publication about that. That's what I'm saying. Try Martians, because North Koreans don't really fly. Why was that even brought up? Well, this is just to scare people. Scare whom? The West? Scare us? It's a typical attempt to create pseudo-reality that I took upon myself to help dismantle. That prevents us from seeing reality as is and gives us fake options for fake choices. Unfortunately, the whole democracy works like that. That was invented back in the early 20th century when they needed to persuade Americans to aid the Allies in Europe in the First World War. That's when they had a very high-level discussion. And there were two groups. One was saying that democracy is based on the false reality, on deceiving the people, on simplifying the reality for them to make easier choices. And the second group was for educating the election masses to make sure that they know what they're voting for. Unfortunately, the first group prevailed, and that's what we have now. What bothers me is not that, okay, we have this pseudo-reality constantly being created. I will continue dispelling it, but it continues to be developed time and time again. What bothers me is the simplicity of this pseudo-reality. So our people in power think people in Ukraine are so dumb that they don't even need to bother with logical connections. I was recently going through the details of a statement by Sergei Leshchenko, and according to President, as he said, the West demands to lower our drafting age to 18 and is not giving us additional arms. So where's logic in this? Right? You think people would learn this logic on the fourth grade at school, but the West demands what? To lower the threshold so we could fight more effectively, and then do not give us arms so we would lose more effectively? Where's logic in this? But nobody bothers of those who work on our information policies. They just don't pick the words, connections, any logic. And that starts to remind more and more of a very funny comic book with Koreans, nuclear winter, NATO or death, etc., etc. I wish they at least made it a little more logical, a little more complex. All right, like in that movie, they do not respect you. They took away your car, they took away your driver's license. Alexei, but by the way, I need to congratulate you. You can, or should be able to come back to Ukraine now. Right. When formally we had the ceasefire and there's no martial law, then I probably will consider coming back. No, not about this. Zelensky recently said they only have one enemy. It's Russia outside. There are no enemies inside Ukraine. Right, I understand you now. No enemies, but there is a letter from 20 plus congressmen from the ruling party to prosecution cases against me, an attempt to start a third one, and there are some other elements that I'm not going to go in details now, but I'll definitely bring them up to light after this war. I'm not going to give myself up into the hands of people who are abusing their power and are hostile towards me and are using all opportunities of martial law and war times that they have to prosecute those who do not support them, who criticize them. I have zero legal protection guarantees now. Now, when a normal regime comes in Ukraine after elections, when people in power will not have full breadth of authority under, like now under martial law, then I can come back and I can counter the attacks of those congressmen, etc. Not yet. Okay, if we analyze the speech of Zelensky during the presentation of the victory plan, did you understand why the congressmen were applauding it? Well, because this is a pseudo-elite, or more likely the serving group to pseudo-elites who create this pseudo-reality. They're the most responsible for its creation, and they're some of the main beneficiaries because everything they have is via the deceit of people. And of course they would be applauding, because what they're creating is additional smoke screen that allows them to maintain their position longer. This is a culmination of their rule, and yeah, the populace apparently is deceived and they can continue living lavishly for a bit longer. And after that, it very likely will turn out that it's not you are the ones guilty and to blame, but it's NATO countries who did not give enough resources to support us. While our congressmen were diligently and industriously working throughout the conflict to help Ukraine to win. Right, you've seen what they adopted last week, right? They increased the penalties for illegal gathering of mushrooms and berries. Yeah, right, that's absurd what they concentrate on. I want to go through 4 articles of Zelensky's plan, 3+1, and we can start with NATO. Although Rutte got lost a bit discussing it, he was saying that Ukraine will be 33rd or 34th member of NATO. I guess we will be some member of NATO, but I do have the main question here. So, if from the get-go, from article number 1, the whole plan is impossible, you probably shouldn't be reading the next ones, right? Even though they're more interesting. Alex, there is no reason to discuss it, I think. It is created as impossible plan. And when it seemed that it's not enough, we rose our rhetoric to nuclear arms, which is even more unattainable, for which nobody will agree, because for Ukraine to make nukes, that'll basically position NATO against you, all Europe countries, India, China, those countries. By the way, a lot of countries of the South want to stop the conflict and they exert some pressure on Putin. So they're sort of on our side of interests. But if we're doing it, that'll alienate all of them. And breaking dishes by teens at the table of adults and screaming now what we're doing, which is slowly turning into some howling, behind all that, there is no reason to discuss individual articles. One needs to understand the logic of this message, to bring the situation to a complete absurd so that it's impossible, and then blame the West for not going through with the plan. Because if you're not absurd enough, they may actually go with your plan and then blame you for not fulfilling the articles of it, and they don't want to be blamed. The West needs to be responsible for our failure, everybody but us. I said a while ago that collective consciousness of Ukrainians is about 7 or 8 years old. Maybe at peak levels it reaches 11. That's the time, the age when kids throw tantrums in the supermarket for their parents when the parents start asking about the grades at school. Remember those kids who fall on the floor, scream, and thump their feet and saying, I'm not going to tell you anything, I want a toy. And that's why I'm saying it's beside the point. Which toy do we want and why are we behaving like this? Alexey, why, please understand me, why am I bringing these points, these articles to discuss with you? Understanding the whole background of that situation is that if you give it a thought, nobody else is talking about it for some reason. If you really give it a thought to these articles, they need to be voted on by our people, either on presidential elections or referendum. Referendum, right, Alex? No options or suggestions to do that. Right, we have, by the way, Alex, an added article to a constitution to join NATO. That was changed in an unconstitutional way because our constitution has us as non-bloc, non-nuclear country. Poroshenko and his team and People's Front party, they changed the constitution and added a decision to join NATO there. And nobody cares about that. Now they'll be elevating the degree of heat under these things to such an umpteenth level that nobody will care about details. And they don't care about constitution or referendum or legality of it. And if anybody starts talking about it, will automatically or immediately be accused of being Russian spy or some scoundrel. So if you are calling for a constitution to be used as a legal guideline, you will likely be accused and attacked. We'll have another interesting stage when part of our people will not accept the conditions of a ceasefire. And there's already some hints at the scary right radicals and with the leading power statements. It's curious how they'll be telling them stories about NATO is the one to blame, that they did not allow us to join them or make nukes. So all this, that program of pseudo-reality has a very sharp focus to also be liked by the right in Ukraine. Why? Well, so they don't break windows in presidential office again, because they can come, not like last time, with paint and some wood planks to burn, but they can come with bullets this time. I guess they want to pacify this group preemptively. And, our power thinks that they need to talk to the most screaming ones, to the loudest ones, while the masses will just consume whatever they're given. But our masses do have power. They're mum for 5 years, but then they come to the voting booth and they leave a mark on a page. You don't even need to tell them much, but once every 5 years they have a colossal power to change things in the country. And I think the results of the first elections after this war will really surprise everybody, both the rights and the leading powers and the ones responsible and the ones trying to run away from responsibility. A discussion item, I think, about the right, Alexei, because the real rights are either on the front or already in the ground. Well, right, they're afraid that the group that is on the front will come back and will have some matters to discuss with the ruling clan. So if the government policies are being constructed not driven by the overall country interests, but by a group of 5,000 armed people, right? We have an example of de Gaulle, by the way, when he was leaving, when France was leaving Algiers, they had one of the best detachments mutinying against that. They were quickly explained their place in the societal structure, and that mutiny was quelched. So now we have Zelensky and Poroshenko playing with a small group on the right, toying with them, trying to allow them to determine more future of our country. If they want to build such a policy or do that politics to cater to the loudest and most armed group, then don't call themselves strong leaders, because that's not leadership. That's just following the loudest. Well, Alexei, also Bild published this week that Ukraine indeed is reviewing the opportunities to recreate nuclear arms. And they're referring a contact in Ukrainian government saying that if there'll be an order, they'll need just several weeks to build the first bomb. Alexei, that's a finish line, I think. Well, this is an information operation, Alex, to fearmonger the West. And I want to say here that just a day before yesterday, I talked with some contacts here in the United States, and I was asking them, what are you waiting for? And they're saying, we're waiting for our next provocation from Ukraine, and this is the provocation. What they were discussing at this point were thinking about attack on the nuclear facility in Russia, attack on Kremlin, or incursion into another district in Russia. So Ukraine had chosen this other one to threaten with some nukes, but it's not over yet. And the West is ready. They're expecting Ukraine to be doing things like this. They were anticipating that Ukraine will try to escalate, and they understand what the game is about, and they will be taking their own measures to counter all that. What do you think Zelensky will be doing? Can you calculate his stance in this situation? Oh yeah, he will be just escalating to the highest degree he can. And eventually the string will tighten so much that it'll break and rupture, and we'll see about the fallout of this. So the question here is, he either goes for a ceasefire or he doesn't. And we'll understand that first by the 5th of November. That's to the elections in the United States. And second option is by the new year. And heroic quest against the decision of those 5 big countries, so New Yalta, that we talked about. This is brave and crazy decision, but I think only brave and crazy decisions that are supplied with logistics are good. The ones that are not, they're terrible. Because the West, all they need to do is slightly stifle that spigot through which they give us the arms. Like Prime of Minister of France came out and said, we promised you 3 billion, but we'll give you only 2 because we'll be dwindling our support. Germany came out and said they're not going to give us heavy armaments. So we understand the vector. They will be stifling their support of Ukraine, so we cannot continue this war. And they don't care whether we have nukes or don't have nukes. Nobody cares, really. And second question I want to bring here, who was ever saved by nukes? Well, Zelensky on a tribune is describing his conversation. I guess it was his personal conversation with Trump. He was saying that countries of NATO are not fighting, their people are not dying, we are fighting and dying because we gave our nukes at the fallout of USSR, and because we're not in NATO. Well, fantastic story. Let's look at Russia. They're a nuclear country, threatening to use nukes. We've been hitting Russia for 2.5 years, including on their own territory. How much did the nukes help them? Britain, also a nuclear country. In 1982, Argentina captures Falkland Islands. Did nukes help Britain in this case? China, India, and Pakistan, they're nuclear powers and they're warring between each other. Does it help them? Nukes is a very niche story. When it goes to the question is of existence of the country or not, that's the only chance when it can be used effectively, more or less. It's a deterrent. Do we face that? I think we do. Russia is promising to capture us, right? There'll be no Ukraine if they win. No, they don't have enough capacity to capture us. At best, they have what they have now. Maybe they get to Dnieper at the very ultimate best if we stop resisting. So one of the sides of pseudo-reality is a conversation that Russia wants to destroy Ukraine as a nation, and that it's an internal enemy of Ukraine, and they want to get to Lvov and capture the whole territory. They knew from the beginning, the creators of this fake reality, that Russia is first incapable of doing it, second, it never really set the goal to be like this. Okay, so let's imagine we have 10 nuclear warheads. What will it change? We'll have less soldiers refusing to fight. We'll have better fighting soldiers on the front, where the actual dynamic of this conflict is emerging. Or we'll start to use nukes on Pokrov direction. What will it change? Nothing, I think. United States is a nuclear country. How many times was it attacked just the last year? 2 or 3 times Iran hit American military bases, and what? And we're talking about the mass attacks. Israel is supposedly a nuclear state. Did it help them much against Hamas or Hezbollah or from Iranian missiles? They supposedly have nukes. Iran is shooting 150 missiles at them at a time, and nuclear weapons is nothing but deterrent. It never saved anybody from a conventional war. We can get 300 warheads, but the war will continue raging. Well, one thing is to get it, or to say that you have some. Let's imagine we conduct nuclear trials somewhere, nuclear test. We even show the world that we do have it. Okay, do some underground test explosion. I'm sure if we do it in Karpathy region, for example, the citizens of that region will be really grateful to our government. But okay, we demonstrated. What next? What happens after? Each infantry trooper will get plus 300 to defense and plus 200 points to attack. Is that what's going to happen? Because we tested some nuke somewhere and declared that we have it. It doesn't change anything. Okay, the front. It's crackling and crumbling. Between Kupiansk and Borovaya, there is already a cut. Oh, that's not even a cut. This is a protrusion. This is probably, there are a couple 100 yards left to get to Oskol. So de facto, Russians are separating our group there in two. This is a pretty standard and great achievement for every commander, and Russians figure out how to get there. Is it because our army is a Soviet type? No, this is because, Alex, our army is a collective farm type. If we had a Soviet army type, it would be a bit more smart. Our army is volunteers and, collective farm defenders, I guess. A simple example. Ministry of Defense do not have their own intel. They have to beg for intel from a different department, from military intel of Ukraine. It shouldn't be. He should be just giving orders to get certain intel. Second, we don't have operative level of command, the key connectivity between tactics and strategy. We don't have that. That link is completely sunk. It's gone. And the army is commanded also not by orders, but by battle instructions, which is a direct violation of the code, but nobody cares about it. So if you don't go too deep, I can give you 10 more easily, but this is good enough to start. This is not an army. This is, a group of volunteers and maybe some collective farm militia. Then you get detachments like Asgard coming out to the social media and saying that some civilians are interfering in their command. This is not an army. And not an army is giving not quite an army results on the front. Volunteers can actually win. That's true. At the beginning of this war, we showed a fantastic result because of patriotism and the energy and the resistance. But what's the main difference between the army and the volunteers? At some point in my life, I was learning horseback riding. I was supposed to play a certain part in the movie, and I was figuring out how to ride horses. So an old movie coach told me the difference between a professional horse and unprofessional. He was saying it's like a human. Unprofessional can take a barrier higher than a professional would do. It can run faster than the professional, if the mood is right. But professional horse, without having any mood, will still be stable in running distance and jumping the hurdles. Professional differs from unprofessional, from an amateur, is that they continue doing and delivering results even when they're demotivated. Professional army, even demotivated, continues to deliver results. They may not understand or agree why the war is going, like Americans in Afghanistan, but they're still delivering good results. And volunteers can achieve certain goals. Of course, at the beginning of war in Kharkov and Kherson operations, we did remarkably well. But volunteers and amateurs cannot give stable result because they're not professionals. And here we have people proudly saying that the army is 80% volunteers, they're not professionals. 123,000 do not want to fight. too many just refuse to take arms once they're brought to the front. Do you think, Alexei, that maybe they're hiding the losses behind those who don't want to fight? No, no, I know exactly where the refusers are and how they do it. They're normal, they're using normal processes, the ones who do not want to fight. Today, on one of Kharkov blog posts, the person was not only busified or drafted, as we say here, they actually broke his windshield on his vehicle and dragged him through it. Do you think if they bring that person to Borovaya, give him the Kalashnikov and tell him to fight for Ukraine, he'll continue fighting? Or would he just surrender? There was an episode recently when 3 guys were brought to the front like that. 3 of them just laid down their arms and switched and went to Russia and surrendered. Those who are brought to front like this, they will not fight effectively. That's easy to remember. You, as a military, do you condemn these things? Do I condemn this decision? Well, surrender to the enemy, voluntary surrender to the enemy, is a military crime, technically, for our internal code. For me personally, I would say I do not accept that as an option, me as Alexei. But if you look at the law, at the legal side, this is the crime against laws of and codes of military service, and voluntary switch to the enemy's side is treason. That's how it is classified in our documents in Ukraine. And if I am to speak here as somebody who dabbles in psychology, I want to say that whoever is brought to the front like this, who is drafted against his will find a window to not fight, will find a way to avoid actually shooting. There was an interesting commentary today from Khmelnytskyi prosecutor's office. There were some materials about 6 millions that were found there, and the whole family with a lot of money who were bribing. So now the prosecution system is starting to dig into different districts, into the system of health and military exclusion documents, medical exclusion. And the material highlights the point that a lot of prosecutors, or majority of prosecutors in Khmelnytskyi district, are disabled. And they tried to protest that. They said, we have 225 people, 48 of them are disabled. I'm the main prosecutor of Khmelnytskyi district. I'm also disabled, and myself and the others have got our disability even before the war. And according to his publication, he said, to his statement, he said that he got his disability during one of the operative activities that he was conducting. So I was reading that, it sounded like a whole poem or story. Apparently our prosecutors are not scary figures who are instilling the law and defending the Ukrainian law in the districts. They are actually disabled. Right? Let me switch to the common parlance here, Alex. We can go back to the smart expert way of discussing things. They're just, as in our proverb, they're peeing in the eyes of people without being shy about it. They know that nothing will happen to them, and NATO will be the one to blame. And that's what I'm saying. Ukraine is facing a very simple choice formulated by Pelevin. He either has to be a clown or to serve clowns. And that changes twice a day. Till midday you're doing one role, after midday you do the other. They're not even trying to disguise themselves. They're not trying to come up with serious explanations. They just don't care. All right, if we are to support and develop the scenario that you shared today about 2 variants, either 2 elections of the US president or till next year, when we will likely have some ceasefire. Speaking objectively, ceasefire, is it a defeat of Ukraine? No, this war is not about defeat or victory. We're not even talking about Ukraine here much. Russian Federation, when they started this war, they started not with an ultimatum to Kiev. There was no ultimatum to Kiev. There was an ultimatum to NATO. And we are the territory where Russian Federation decided to shame United States and NATO. That is their main task of this war. And ideally bring everything to a multipolar world, to accepting the multipolarity of this planet. And Look at Trump and Kamala, recent debate when he attacked her and said, "You're bad negotiators. You've been negotiating badly with China and Russia." And she lost their first sec. She basically retorted saying, "Who are they for us to talk to them? We're the only superpower. They can go F themselves," basically was the facial reaction that she produced for a second. But with this new system that it goes to, there'll be a new Yalta agreement. De facto, it already is in existence. Russia and the global south, I think, have achieved their goal. Russia was just the ram that was breaking through the gates and breaking their horns and getting damaged. Russia invested fully into this war. All their paratroopers, all their active troops are here in Ukraine. And they've captured, what, 28% of our country? There are different data, 18 to 28, with Crimea, without Crimea. And they were wasting one soldier for 2.5 square yards of land. So basically, it's a big cemetery. Huge material losses that Russia suffered. 250,000 dead, that according to the most sober estimates. Lost gas market of Europe. A lot of things happened, right? That's on the material level. Russia suffered a defeat. If you measure materially in Ukraine, we also suffered a defeat because a lot of our country left, country citizens, were falling to totalitarian dictatorship with different signs of racial and other tensions. We're now number 150 in the index of freedoms. Russia is on the 119th place in that index, so we're actually sinking deeper. On the other hand, we got 420 billion of aid, became closer with the West. For me, the only argument about victory or lack thereof is creation of multipolar world instead of unipolar. In this regard, Putin has one. On the material level, that's not a victory on the ground. If you measure it by square yards and territories, that's not a victory, neither for us nor for them. For us, of course, this war is a defeat on one hand, because we have lost part of our territory. We have lost a lot of people, dead, wounded, and as refugees. We've lost roughly every third of Ukrainian who left the country and is not likely going to be back. And we very much have sunken in relation to human rights and constitutional freedoms. But for us, the result of this war to look at, and I don't think there is another formulation, the victory for us would be a better peace than before the war. If on the track of after the war, post-war reconstruction, we'll figure out how to provide and secure continuous development for us and secure position, then this material defeat may turn us for us into strategic victory. If no, then we'll be facing defeat on both sides. And unfortunately, I'm thinking that we're closer to this option, because winning strategically is more difficult than just fighting through this war. And of course, there is a third option, to go into the gray zone, to not develop, but also not to continue diminishing, because right now we are dwindling. Since 91, our population has shrunk twice. We're basically eating through our future. This is twice more horrible than that hunger that happened in Ukraine under Soviets at the early 20th century. But collective South has prevailed, I think, in this conflict. Multipolar world is created de facto in the geopolitical space. On the material, of course, no. Military results that Russia is demonstrating, compared with the tasks and the efforts exerted, this is anything but victory. Well, if it is not a victory, then why Russia would stop, do you think? Because, first of all, Putin wants to stop this war psychologically. I said a while ago, you can call him anything, but I understand people rather well. And if you don't believe me, come to my module in my school, in my philosophy school, on the profiling, and you'll see that. Putin is a typical liberal of the 19th century. He does not have the goal to capture Ukraine. First, he understands it's unreal. Second, he doesn't need that. He wants to be led at the table and to be considered as the force and to have its own area of influence. He was demonstrating on the example of Ukraine what will happen if he uses armed force, if he is ignored. His task was to shame collective West here in the Ukraine and to show to global South, China and India, that he has instruments that he can use, even reluctantly. And he demonstrated that rather clearly here. So materially, they cannot afford to capture Ukraine and destroy it. It's absolutely unreal. The West will not let them do that. And China and India are also exerting a big pressure on him. Why? Because there is a collective decision of the global South that if the West is running the ocean trade, then all the land trade in the framework of Eurasia needs to be owned by the collective South. That's why Modi visited Ukraine first time. Over 400 agreements are signed, 120 of them are very serious. Private and different kinds of agreements between companies and organizational structures and government. Because India is considered to be like China #2 by the West. So India is looking for its own ways to get their goods to Europe, services and people and capitals. India cannot use the new Silk Route that China is building, and China is still building their route. Now, they can build it through the territory of Russia, but Russia is heavily sanctioned. So India and China do not quite want it because the financial sphere will be attacked, and without it, you cannot do effective trade. You can put these paths through Turkey, but Turkey is the country that's always in complex relations with its neighbors, constantly fighting, and it's also the focal point of the great Turan of all Turkish-speaking and Turkish cultural people. So they still have the problems of Zangezur corridor and the fact that Turkish military command published its own map of Turan, or friendly people of Turkey, friendly nations, and having similar ethnic roots. So it's a complex thing. Black Sea is another option. Back in the day, Soviet Union actually invested dozens of years and hundreds of millions of dollars into the Black Sea region, and that's what the remnants of infrastructure that they want to use. Yes, of course, it's a long road, it's going through different countries, but it's viable. Plus, we're also agricultural country. Arab countries are very interested in our food supplies. And I'm just looking at the facts here, right? So all these countries, they have created a group called the Friends of Peace in Ukraine, led by China and Brazil, but there are a lot of interesting countries in there. And these are the countries that are interested in ceasefire in Ukraine, in stopping the hot phase of this conflict. They're against the occupied territories being under Russia, especially when it pertains to the railroads and seaports, because any good that will be going to the West through the occupied territories that have a very problematic legal status, that's very difficult because interest will be higher. There could be sanctions against it. That's why they have their own view at the development of Ukraine and the existence and reasons for existence of Ukraine. And full occupation of Ukraine territory by Russia is absolutely not on the table. That's why many times they've expressed their opinion about territorial integrity for Ukraine. They can agree to a de facto occupation, but the euro, nobody will acknowledge that. And that's why northern Cyprus, of a much smaller size country, is also an eternal problem for Turkey. That's also a transit problem. There is a nuance here, Alexei. Kind of a cunning nuance here. What the F? Why Russians are building roads on the occupied territories? Why are they connecting those townships? Why they're building the railroad? Well, because they're building their own system for transportation and logistics. Only for themselves? To start with, yes, just for themselves, because transport of troops is one of the main logistics factor for your victory or not in the military conflict. So they're fortifying the territory to be able to fight more effectively, and then second, to exploit them better, because Russian offensive actually goes through the main mining regions of Ukraine, or industrial regions of Ukraine. So a very precious mine is only 10 kilometers away from Pokrovsk, and if they capture it, that's a certain type of coal there. That's one of the biggest for Ukraine. If they capture it, we'll lose it. They have their own goals, they have their own gameplay. In this regard, you can say that yes, they will have some material successes if they manage to capture all these natural resources to a degree. And China and India have their own logic. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. Modi wouldn't be visiting us, and China would not be creating the group of friends of peace. So they're like vultures, right, Alexei? No, they're not vultures, Alex. They're countries who are defending their own interests at our expense. It's pretty simple. And Ukraine is paying for all that fun, for all that big Yalta. We've paid because we've always been bold and didn't have much brain and didn't have enough support to our boldness. I cheer the boldness that is supported materially, but if it is not, that's a stupid strategy. And we've paid with human lives, with refugees, and with destroyed economy. There's a saying, right? Whatever the fool is doing, he's doing it wrong. So that banquet is at our expense. They're eating not from our body, but actually of our body too. But we can still come to a victorious conclusion and get bigger bonuses than we had before the war. I'll just highlight two perspective directions. First, we need to agree with India and China about Indian, Chinese, and Arab investments into our country post-war, because for Russia it would be much more difficult to repeat anything like this in Ukraine again, because they'll have to bomb the objects owned by India and China here. And these are two major economic partners of Russia, so Russia would not be able to ignore their opinion. And second, we need to make sure that the West is okay with these investments, and not only Western investments that are here. And this is the whole geopolitical game, and this is what we need to be concerned about in reality. This is what we need to talk about, and not about creating some nukes. Because for defense of Ukraine, Chinese, Arab, and Indian investments is a much stronger deterrent than all the nukes we can gather and stockpile here. This is what smart people would be doing, in my view. Okay, one more question from me, Alexey. And then we go to the poll and the other things at the conclusion. So there'll be some questions from listeners, and then whatever else we have left, we'll discuss later from the online chat. Okay, so the QR codes you see on the screen, once again, this is the link to the fundraiser. It's in the description. Next to me, next to Alexey, is the QR code of his School of Philosophy and Personal Growth. On the 19th, they're starting an interesting seminar. And this is about having no pity. Very peculiar angle of looking at this. All right, you can scan this with your smartphone and help us or go for self-development. Alexey, so one more thing to discuss. Let's talk about smart decisions and inner political history that is awaiting for us in this country. Because if the conflict is frozen, then hello elections, right? And if hello elections, then whom can I discuss this with? Public appearance and going into the media sphere of Valery Zaluzhny. He shows up. He says that it's probably impossible to get out of the protracted conflict with Russia. In year 23, Ukraine did not get enough arms to prevail and maybe finish it militarily. And a lot more statements that look like election campaign, hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded. And Ukraine will likely have more enemies because China and Iran will likely be supporting Russia. This is his point of view. Georgia and Belarus have lost their independence, in his opinion, and he says Ukraine needs to acquire at least a 100-year guarantee that it will not be attacked. And what is important is to support Zelensky in his peace plan or victory plan. Do you think Zaluzhny will be next after Zelensky? Do you think Zelensky will transfer to him after these favorable statements? We don't know, right? And I want to say that whatever he says now, this is not Valery Zaluzhny's point of view. This is Valery Zaluzhny as Ukrainian ambassador in Great Britain. And he's an honest service person. Like he was in the army, he will not contradict the commander-in-chief as part of the government apparatus. So I'm taking this statement very calmly because his personal opinion may be accentuated differently. But for now, this statement comes from the ambassador of Ukraine in Great Britain. That would be very strange if he would have said something different. That's why I'm not paying too much attention to this. Ukrainian elections will likely have two elections, somebody from the old group, Tymoshenko, Poroshenko, or another joker, like Zelensky was a joker. the option for a joker to win is much more probable than any of the older politicians, because people at large do not trust the old politicians and they will not vote for them. They will vote for them only in one option if there'll be no joker. If there'll be nobody to select from, then they'll go to a second vote and choose one of those. But it's curious who will be the joker. Right, this is a interesting thing in Ukrainian politics. We do have jokers in this country. All right, concluding our poll, as I started, when Zelensky told Trump, Ukraine will either be nuclear or we will go to NATO. As a result, 4% NATO, 6% nukes, 8% would select Trump, and 81% want a different president of Ukraine. Can you comment on this, Alexey, please? And again, these sharp statements from Zelensky, I think he's digging his own grave with this, both externally among our partners, but also internally, I think. Well, look, Alex. So the polling, of course, it's a local stream polling, right? It's not an official one. We don't pretend we are, but it's revealing. 81% is a result that speaks for itself. The grade has been given to Zelensky, and what is left is for people to repeat that same grade during the next elections. Because every 5 years, the deceived ones are going to express their position. The ones who've been peed upon, who've been lied to, who've been abused, who've been thrown to die, they'll go to the election booth and vote. What we need in these elections is as many people as we can to vote, because the legitimacy of the new president, who will be solving the most difficult tasks, and reconstruction of our country will be more complex than fighting this war. That president needs a lot of support. Or, by not supporting somebody, you're taking personal responsibility for somebody else to be elected who will not have full legitimacy to solve these issues, to tame the right, to pick the right economic vector, to win over the anti-system that is devouring Ukraine. Because Ukraine is not just one object, right? It's, imagine it as a nice village cow, and then there is a octopus of that anti-system sucking it dry, all the resources from it. So the task of the next president is to separate the cow from the octopus and destroy the octopus. Otherwise, it'll devour all the money that will come here for after the war restoration. We'll invent some other nuclear or other weapons and engage us in the next conflict with Russia. So think carefully what you vote for, because these elections have a risk of becoming the last ones for Ukraine. They'll either be the breakthrough when we change the vector from devouring ourselves to development, or the last ones. You mean the last as the government, as the country? Yeah, we may lose it, because if anti-system remains during 5 to 15 years, we will lose the sovereignty. We may have something left as the 3 westernmost districts left of Ukraine, but it's not a Ukraine, really. All right, 21,500 are watching us live. Please do not forget to click the like button. This is the end of the first hour. Thank you so much for joining us to watch that stream.